we've contributed over the years, and we have 22 trillion to NATO, and they look at Europe and they kind of feel like we're the older sibling who's spending for everyone's defense, and meanwhile people in Europe are living La Dolce Vita, they're taking August off, and we're basically kind of bankrolling their lifestyle, and they have all these fabulous social benefits. Well, we can't buy houses, and we don't have paid maternity leave, and we don't have all these.
Donald Trump received 5 military deferments during Vietnam, 4 for education, 1 for bone spurs in his heels that his own former doctor told the New York Times were diagnosed not because of a medical finding, but because Fred Trump was the doctor's landlord. That man stood at Davos in front of the entire Western Alliance and said NATO soldiers stayed a little back, a little off the front lines in Afghanistan. The United Kingdom lost 457 service members in that war. 405 of those deaths came from direct hostile military action, not accidents, not illness, combat, in Helmand province, in Sangin. Alongside American Marines in some of the most brutal urban warfare of the modern era, a man who never served a single day just told the world that those soldiers were not really there. And CNN brought in Lydia Moynihan to defend it. And what she said, trying to defend it accidentally, made the most compelling case for universal health care you will ever hear on cable news. And Van Lathan caught it in 11 words and handed it right back to her. Hit that like button, subscribe to Kelly Takeover, and let's get into every piece of this. Let's go.
All right, next for us, allies are livid at Donald Trump tonight, not over Greenland, but his claim that NATO troops avoided the front lines in Afghanistan. Even Prince Harry is calling him out for it. We'll debate next. President Trump is angering America's allies over new comments he made, once again undermining NATO.
I've always said, will they be there if we ever needed them? And that's really the ultimate test, and I'm not sure of that. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines.
Now, in the wake of 9/11, the United States became the first and so far the only NATO member to invoke Article 5. The alliance sent thousands of troops to help the United States fight its war in Afghanistan. And Trump's remarks have outraged lawmakers across the political spectrum, as well as veterans and families of those who gave their lives. Tonight, Prince Harry, who served in Afghanistan, also pushed back, writing in part, quote, "Thousands of lives were changed forever. Those sacrifices deserve to be spoken about truthfully and with respect, as we all remain united and loyal to the defense of diplomacy and peace." President Trump, he's the president, but he seems to not have very much grasp of recent history or not so recent history. But in this case, it is astoundingly disrespectful to our allies to suggest that they did nothing when they actually did quite a lot.
Well, I think we can do two things here. I mean, we could and should acknowledge when our allies have been there for us, and they have been there for us. But there's nothing wrong with holding our allies accountable, which I think is part of what the president's been doing, particularly with Europe, where we've seen they have moved closer into the arms of China, where we have seen them become more and more reliant on Vladimir Putin for their energy needs. And for years, they've been saying they were going to step up and put more money into their own defense and national security, and they didn't do it. And it took President Trump coming in to get them to do it. So I can kind of understand some of the frustrations that he brings forward.
What that got to do with him lying?
Lying?
He lied. He said that they didn't. He said that they didn't help out. They helped. He said that they haven't been there for all. Let's say everything you just said is true.
I started my statement by saying I think we could and should acknowledge when our allies are there.
I know. All right, but then so that's the first part. This is what I like. So the first part is and then the second part is where you launder. The second part of your sentence, you launder what he said as if there's some universe which it's sane in, and it's not. There's no.
I didn't launder anything. I stated facts.
You
laundered it because all three things that I said were facts.
President Trump, he came out and he said something that's demonstrably untrue. But let me tell you why it's not that bad in the grand scheme of things. He's the president of the United States. The stuff that he says matters. We should care as an American community whether or not he's saying things that are true and whether or not he's saying things that our reputation benefits from. And he's not doing that. He's acting crazy.
I think it's...
And that right there is such a very, very valid point. And this is going to be very, very brief. That Van Lathan literally just said. I always say the humiliation ritual continues because MAGA have to bend themselves into pretzels to try and defend the indefensible. The US being the only country that has triggered Article 5 of the NATO treaty, and everybody within Europe, they came to America's defense, which we should. That should be acknowledged and respected, even though, yes, Europe does need to do more. But this wasn't a point that you should be trying to make a defense for what Donald Trump said, because like I always say, you can't defend the indefensible.
Particularly harmful when it's statements that undercut the sacrifice that a lot of these families made. And it was great to see Senator Tom Tillis list out the countries and the amount of people who died. UK, 457. I mean, I know that he has continuous beef with NATO, but at some point we have to say, okay, a line has been crossed, and we're talking about young men and women who died and sacrificed themselves when they didn't have to for this country.
Let me just play what one of those families said, a family who lost or whose child sustained serious injuries in Afghanistan.
It's disgraceful, it's disrespectful, it's hurtful. These are the rantings of a child. This is somebody who is deflecting from other things that he said, and it's not acceptable in a supposed leader of the free world.
It is, to Van's point, not even remotely in the same universe of things for Trump to have complaints about whether NATO is, committing enough to their defense, or whether or not they are too close to China, maybe they're taking Russian oil. It's not in the same universe as him then using falsehoods to essentially smear people who sacrificed their lives for us, Americans.
Yeah, they died. People died, and they were on the front lines. And so you're right, he did lie. And I wish more Republicans would come out and speak out against him. Crazy thing about this is the second time I have seen a clip in the last sort of 5 days from an ally or from someone essentially saying that Donald Trump is acting like a child. We saw this in Greenland, where he admitted that because he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize, that's why he was upset about Greenland and wanted to, at every turn, he is embarrassing us on the world stage, and it is embarrassing that he is now being called a child.
And I just want to say, as somebody from the outside looking in, please hear and understand, I walk around, I see the headlines. I see the headlines on the front of British newspapers. I hear what it is that people are speaking about when they're sitting down in cafes. The way in which we're looking at the United States of America right now, we're almost giving America a bit of a side eye. And it's sad because we know that he has a couple more years in office. But then after that, the person that has to pick up the mantle, hopefully it's going to be a Democrat, not a Republican. They've got a lot of work to do to rebuild the trust that the United States once had with the rest of us. A lot of work has to be done.
Put up real quick the penguin meme, because I think this speaks to what you're talking about. There is a kind of acceptance of a dumbing down of not just politics, but I mean, this is like foreign policy. He's walking, it's a meme, right? He stole a meme from somebody else. It's AI generated. There are no penguins on Greenland. There are no penguins in the Northern Hemisphere.
Unfortunate.
It's not even funny. It's just embarrassing at a certain point. When are we going to get back to a serious White House?
Well, look, I disagree with the president's comments, basically diminishing Europe's aid. And I'm super grateful for every veteran. And we should never pretend that they didn't sacrifice their lives, because that is such an important contribution. But I think a couple things we saw at Davos this week, I think Americans, just generally, if I can kind of talk about how the MAGA base feels about this, they feel like we've contributed over the years, and we have, 22 trillion to NATO. And they look at Europe and they kind of feel like we're the older sibling who's spending for everyone's defense. And meanwhile, people in Europe are living La Dolce Vita. They're taking August off. And we're basically kind of bankrolling their lifestyle. And they have all these fabulous social benefits. Well, we can't buy houses, and we don't have paid maternity leave, and we don't have all these things in the U.S. And that's what he was trying to communicate. And obviously, that was not done in a great way. But the other piece
those are choices that we make in the United States.
What you
we
guys
could
are
certainly
saying,
have paid maternity leave.
We got common ground. You guys are saying that if Europe plays the NATO bill, then we're going to get European-style universal health care. You guys are down?
I'm not commenting on healthcare. I'm saying
Because you said they got all these.
I didn't hear her say that.
I'm just saying, you're talking about what they got. Because I'm down for it.
I'm saying, how does the average American feel when people in France are living with Dolce Vita
All right, guys.
Dolce
and
Vita.
we're bankrolling?
Let us start with the record, because the record is what makes this so much worse than just a careless comment at a conference. NATO allies as a whole suffered 1,160 deaths in Afghanistan. A full third of every coalition casualty in that 20-year war was a non-American soldier. The United Kingdom alone lost 457 service members, 405 from direct hostile combat action. The UK spent the equivalent of £32.8 billion in today's money on that war. Canada lost 158 soldiers. France lost 90. Germany lost 57. These are not countries that sent a few troops to stand in the back and take photographs. These are countries that buried their children in the same soil Americans buried theirs. And Donald Trump, 5 deferments, 4 for education, 1 for bone spurs that his own father's tenant diagnosed as a favor, stood at the World Economic Forum in Davos and told the leaders of those countries that their soldiers stayed a little back. Not in a private conversation, not in a poorly worded tweet, at Davos, on the record, in front of the cameras, to their faces. Van Lathan asked the MAGA guests the only question that mattered in that moment. What does any of the NATO spending argument have to do with him lying? And that question never got a clean answer because there is no clean answer. The spending debate and the lie about dead soldiers are not the same conversation. You can believe Europe needs to contribute more to its own defense, a legitimate position held by people across the political spectrum, including Barack Obama, and still acknowledge that calling those soldiers cowards is a lie told by someone who was never asked to be one of them. Those are two completely separate things, and the entire MAGA defense of Trump's comments depended on conflating them into one. Lydia Moynihan tried. She said she thinks we can and should acknowledge that allies have been there for us, and then immediately pivoted to NATO spending and European energy dependence on Russia. Van Lathan named exactly what that pivot was. He called it laundering. You say the right thing and then use it as cover for the thing that cannot be defended. The acknowledgement becomes the permission slip for everything that follows. But here's where this segment went somewhere nobody at that table fully saw coming. Lydia Moynihan, trying to explain why Americans feel frustrated with NATO and European allies, said this. Americans feel like they are bankrolling European lifestyles. And Europeans have universal health care and paid maternity leave and fabulous social benefits. And Americans cannot buy houses and do not have paid maternity leave and do not have all these things. She said that, out loud, on CNN, as a defense of Donald Trump. Van Lathan heard every word of it and asked her one question. If Europe pays its NATO bill in full, do Americans get universal health care? She said, I am not commenting on health care. She said, I am not commenting on healthcare because the honest answer is no, and she knew it, and the whole panel knew it, and everybody watching knew it. The same political movement that just spent 10 minutes using European social programs as a grievance against NATO. The same people who point to paid maternity leave and universal healthcare and affordable housing as proof that Europeans are living better than Americans would never in 1,000 years vote to give Americans those same programs. The frustration Moynihan is describing is real. Working Americans genuinely cannot afford to see a doctor. They genuinely cannot afford housing. They genuinely do not have paid leave when a baby is born or a parent gets sick. All of that is true, and all of that is devastating. But here is what is also true and what Moynihan's argument cannot survive. The United States spends more per capita on healthcare than any developed country in the world. More than the UK, more than Germany, more than France. More than every country she just cited as an example of people living better than Americans. And it leaves tens of millions uninsured anyway. That is not a NATO problem. That is what happens when one political party has blocked universal coverage for 60 years while telling working Americans that the reason they cannot see a doctor is that Europeans are taking advantage of them. The money is not going to Europe. The money is going to insurance companies and pharmaceutical executives and hospital systems that charge Americans 10 times what every other country pays for the same medication. And the party that Lydia Moynihan represents has protected every single one of those systems every single time anyone proposed changing them while pointing across the Atlantic and saying, look at those people taking August off. Van Lathan made that visible in 11 words. So if Europe pays the NATO bill, Americans get universal health care? You guys are not signing on to that? Because she brought it up. She built the entire argument herself. He just handed it back. And underneath all of it is the thing that needs to be said clearly and completely. A president with 5 military deferments called dead soldiers cowards at Davos. Prince Harry, who actually served in Afghanistan, called it out. Senator Tom Tillis listed the countries and the casualties by name. Families who lost children in Sangin and Helmand heard the President of the United States say their children were hanging back, and Lydia Moynihan came to CNN to defend that and ended up accidentally making the case for Medicare for all instead. Drop a comment below. When Van Lathan asked if Europe pays the NATO bill, do Americans get universal health care, and Moynihan said, I am not commenting on health care, what did you feel in that moment? Because I want to know. Subscribe to Kelly Takeover because we are following every accidental admission and we are not letting 11 words get buried in the next segment. See you in the next one.